Hi, my name is Daria Mezentsova and welcome to Politeka World Show. In today's show, we will talk about the following. What were the changes on the front lines this week? The crucial highlight of the week is the visit of Zelenskiy to Washington. This is a good time for such a trip because the adoption of the budget at stake. But how numerous positive points for Ukraine Zelensky agreed? And do Ukrainian and American leaders have the same perspectives on their approach to pursuing peace with Russia? We will talk about it with our expert. With us today is American politologist Jameson J. Smart. Jameson, I am happy to have you here on my show, Politeka World.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so it was a long time we were negotiated and totally we are here. So let's start from this week and the last developments on the front line. So we heard from the Chancellor of the Office of the President, Arestovich, the Ukrainian army advanced on the Bakhmut direction. So what else do you observe in a few words? How we could finalize this week on the front line?
Well, I mean, obviously things are moving in the direction favorable to Ukraine. The war, ultimately, Ukraine will win. So it's just a question if this week we go a little bit further ahead or a little bit further back. Even it's nothing in the world. We know ultimately it will go ahead, and Ukraine will liberate all of the territory that is its own sovereign territory.
Yeah, and what do you make of this week? Do you feel that Ukraine advance right now, or there are some dangerous things around the front line? As we heard from Putin this week, that they increased the number of soldiers and the costs on the military field and so on and so on.
No, I think that the rules of the war are changing, and what I mean by that is this. I think that Putin understands very clearly that he cannot win if he continues fighting as he was fighting before. It's clear that Ukraine was able to liberate huge amounts of territory quite quickly, considering how large the Russian military is. And Putin knows that if he continues to use the same strategies he was using before, the same tactics he was using before, that he was going to lose quickly. And so he was forced to come up with a new strategy. And his new strategy we see in the form of the bombing of the electric stations and heating stations. That's part of his new strategy. There's also, as you know, the rumor or the hypothesis that he may attack in January, February from Belarus down, and that's possible. But he understands very clearly if he doesn't do something completely different than what he's done before, there's no way that he can win. So I think he is prepared to try new strategies and new tactics to try to move things in the interest of Russia.
Will it work out somewhere in some directions on the front line?
I think that's why Putin wants to change the front line. I think that's part of the reason he wants to have an invasion from Belarus. Currently, they're very entrenched. They're really dug in the eastern part of Ukraine, this northern part of Ukraine. And so it's going to be very slow there, not quick. That's why Putin understands he must take a different path. How is he going to do that? When's he going to do that? It's a great question. Nobody's really quite sure. But if it's going to happen, it's probably the next 45 days or so. And if that were to happen, Putin would hope to distract from the battles in the eastern part of Ukraine, which would take away the attention as well as the soldiers, as well as the technology from eastern Ukraine, and redirect it to the areas of, say, Rivne and Zhytomyr and that area near the Belarusian border, which would then allow him, he hopes, to then regain territory in the eastern part or near Kherson and these other areas, because that's his only hope. He knows that the Ukrainian military is superior than his military, and he cannot afford to continue fighting the war as he was fighting it for the past 10 months.
Yeah, and this week we know Putin came to Belarus to talk with his homologue Lukashenko. How do you feel? Were these talks fruitful in a sense that Lukashenko agreed to join this trip of the war in Ukraine, or it was more about destructive way for Russia, and the fruitful thing for Kiev and for Ukraine, because now, as I could see, Ukraine could use these developments around Belarus for its favor to get more military aid from the partners. How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I think that Belarus is Putin understands very well that Lukashenko doesn't want to join the war. He understands very well that if we continue fighting the war as it's being fought without some sort of something attack through Belarus, it's not possible. So he needed to persuade Lukashenko. I don't think he's successful. Lukashenko knows to be very unpopular with his population. And I've read statistics saying that as low as about 10-15% of the Belarusian population would support some sort of armed conflict with Ukraine. So it's vastly unpopular. So what does that really translate into? I think that translates into the fact that Putin was hoping to charm and to make whatever suggestions or offers to Lukashenko and to try to impress the Belarusian people. But from all reports that I've seen, it was unsuccessful, his trip.
On which Belarus could fall under Putin?
I really don't think it's impossible that Putin could just kill Lukashenko and try to absorb the country. That would fit with his general lifestyle choices. I mean, Putin does kill people quite a bit. So killing the leader of the country like he killed Mikheyev, who's Minister of Foreign Affairs just a few weeks ago, who I believe the Russians did kill, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it would make sense. So if that were to happen, that would change everything, because Belarus then actually would be able to be used however Putin so desired.
So it could be real that Putin kill Lukashenko.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe he was going there in Belarus to talk about it. Okay, the crucial highlight of the week is the visit of Zelensky to Washington. And we know that this visit signifies closer ties between US and Ukraine. And also it's a good time because this week is budget week for US. So I wonder how numerous positive points for Ukraine Zelensky agreed to.
Well, I think that it's most important about the trip, even more than what they specifically agreed to, was I would understand that there's now a strategy going forward of how Ukraine can be included in what the U.S. is doing with the new Congress. The new Congress will be majority Republican. Currently, it's majority Democrat. Now it'll be majority Republican. The Senate remains majority Democrat, and Joe Biden, of course, is a Democrat. So it's now. I think that part of the discussion yesterday would have been, how is it that we can make sure that Ukraine will be included in what goes on? And that's why it's so important that Zelensky came and he spoke to not just our elected leaders, but to the American people, so that they understood the importance of helping Ukraine, and they felt committed in the next 2 years for the U.S. presidential elections, felt committed to continue supporting Ukraine.
So did Zelensky get this support by Republicans?
I think that the reality is that the majority of support, Zelensky will be fine, as Ukraine will be fine with the Republicans. I think that the leadership of the Republican Party realizes that the vast majority of Americans support Ukraine. And to not support Ukraine would be just simply not wise strategy. Right? You don't take a position that's against that which your voters want. And since the majority, 73% of Americans, support more weapons for Ukraine, it would be very unusual to seriously oppose Ukraine. I think it's very easy for some politicians to say so publicly because they want to show that they are trying to keep taxes low, for instance. But it's for domestic purposes. It's not based on international relations. But I think even them, they understand the importance of helping Ukraine.
Yeah, but we heard that some Republicans want more control on military aid. Do you observe some dangerous things? For example, the delay of the aid. We know that Ukraine always says so. I mean, Ukrainian officials always say that the military aid needed here quicker and rapidly, and so on, so on. So Don't you think that there could be even more delay in really very important aid, like air defense systems, for example?
I don't think so. I think that the new Republicans might want more oversight. That is to verify that the money that's given has been spent correctly and that the weapons are being used correctly. That doesn't really take much more time. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a significant factor. I don't think anything. Frankly, I don't think anything's really going to change that people will notice.
Mm-hmm. So, and if we talk about the unanimity, I mean, between Ukraine and US. So, this visit of Zelensky to US, does it show that, for example, right now, Ukrainian leader and American leader have the same perspectives to the approach of pursuing peace in Ukraine and to pursuing peace with Russia? I mean,
Well, I think that Joe Biden has said the whole time, and he's been very clear as far as he goes with peace with Russia. It's totally in the hands of Ukraine. I mean, the Americans have no opinion about what Ukraine must do or should do. It is up to Ukrainians to decide that. But the Americans will support the Ukrainian decision, whatever that is, which I think is the correct position. Who is the United States to dictate or decide for Ukraine what they should or should not fight for? That's not really the Americans' decision. But at the same time, Ukraine does have a right to all of its territory, which is the internationally defined borders as of 1991. And so the United States believes that it is a sign of, it's actually a symbol of what it means to be a sovereign state, that you have borders that are protected by international law. And so the Americans will give weapons to Ukraine to protect international borders for as long as Russia continues to seek to occupy or to at least attack or to invade the country. And so I think that the United States is not going to change its policy in any significant way. Rather, it's just going to continue saying to Zelensky or whoever the Ukrainian leader will be in the future that we support your decision. We're ready to help you.
Mm-hmm. And what is your position on sweeping the victory of Ukraine? Can we observe that US doesn't want that this war lasts for years? Do we now have this understanding?
I think that nobody wants it to last for years. I think everybody hopes it'll end sooner. But is it possible it lasts for years? Of course it's possible. I mean, there's nothing that's guaranteed. I mean, in warfare, like in anything, nothing's guaranteed. What's going to happen tomorrow, we can't predict. I mean, listen, I think that Ukraine will win. How and when is a different question. There's so many factors, so many variables that we simply don't know. So I would hope that time proves that it's quite quick that Ukraine can finish the war. But it still leaves the problem of Russia. I mean, Vladimir Putin is somebody who has shown that he's willing to just keep throwing missiles at Ukraine to hit the electric energy places, the electric energy stations, the heating stations. And by doing this, he's hoping to break Ukraine and break its people. But if Ukraine can endure this and continue fighting, they can be sure, Ukraine can be sure that the Americans will be with them and able to support them in many capacities.
And what about efforts US makes to isolate Russia? Could we observe some missteps, rather?
In terms of what again? I'm sorry?
In terms of isolation of Russia.
Oh, yeah. So I think
tell that US should push this isolation much rapidly.
I think we're pushing it pretty well. I mean, Russia is pretty incredibly isolated. The ruble lost about 15% of its value, or was devalued about 15% in the course of a month. That's a significant decline for a country. And I think that next year Russia's going to deal with a huge amount of inflation, and part of that reason is that they don't have access to foreign currency. And so I think that the reality is that Russia is extremely isolated, and it doesn't bother Putin. Unfortunately, Putin is not motivated by what's best for even Russian citizens. He's motivated by what's best in his ideology, which is a very radical ideology. I mean, he's a fascist.
Yeah, and what about sanctions against against Putin, against people near him? I mean, officials for the most nearest his homologues?
Well, we've sanctioned a lot of the people near him, and so I'm happy that they continue to sanction people. Of course, it's the right decision. Ultimately, though, I don't know if that's going to be what changes the war. It's ultimately, if we look at the United States' history of sanctions, in the case of Cuba, in the case of Venezuela, in the case of Iran, in the case of North Korea, sanctions against Russia since 2014, we see that the reality is that they rarely change a country's politics. Sanctions almost never, I do not remember one time in American history where sanctions effectively changed the behavior of a country. They just don't. And so what I think would be a better bet is to analyze how it is that we can provide for Ukraine security tomorrow. I mean, if Ukraine liberated all of its territory, Crimea, Donbass, everything, what would prevent Putin from just firing missiles into Ukraine for the next decade and to make sure that Ukraine never has energy again? You can destroy a country and not be invading it. And there can be not one Russian all of Ukraine. What would be the future be if there's never going to be security enough that there can be flights or insurance or investment? This is really a problem. So I think the real question we should ask ourselves, more important than most questions, is simply how do we stop Putin from doing that? And I think the only way we can stop him is to remove him from power.
Yeah, but would sanctions, I mean strong sanctions, make it impossible to finance this war for Putin?
I mean, the problem is he's not buying it on the market. There's nothing. What can we sanction? I mean, it's not coming from U.S. dollars. It's not coming from outside. Keep in mind, Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela, like many of these countries that are sanctioned, they operate in a black market. That's how they buy the Iranian drones. There's a black market that trades these things. For instance, the drug cartels in Latin America work with countries like Venezuela. They work with countries like Iran. Why is that? Because they're dealing with cocaine. They sell cocaine. That's the currency they use. So if you're using drugs, what can we do? Sanction drugs? We already sanctioned drugs. They've always been illegal. Is there still drugs? Yes, there's still drugs.
I got you. Yeah. One more thing. There was a meeting between Medvedev and Xi Jinping in China. So what shows us this political event? Does it mean something not good for Ukraine? I mean, some experts told that China made some decisions about Russia, not be rational, and before China was telling that they are not in the conflict, they are just watching how it's going on, and just gave the understanding to US that there shouldn't be any irrational steps. So now, could we tell that this position was changed, or it was another way?
I don't see any change in China's position. In fact, China just said yesterday that it was going to maintain all the banking sanctions of the United States. So I don't think that China has any interest in changing. China is ultimately motivated by money. If you look at its trade partners, the United States is infinitely more powerful and important to China's interest than is Russia. There's nothing. I mean, what could China possibly gain by upsetting the countries that have the most amount of wealth in the world? It would cost them a lot of money. For what? To be with a country that can't even win a war against its neighbor? It doesn't make sense. There's no strategic benefit for Russia to join. For China to join Russia.
Yeah, but we could see this videos that some military planes from China to Russia was flying with some. It was called military stuff. Yes. So don't you feel that this is really the aid for Russia?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be signed by the Russians that are not sanctioned. There's a lot of things. And I think that China, though, values its relationship with the West more than it values relationship with Russia. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, Russia's economy is so incredibly small. I mean, it's really small. What would be the benefit of being close to a country that can't even do anything effective? I mean, there's no modern technologies in Russia. There's no. They have resources. Yes, Russia definitely needs resources. Aside from this, there's nothing else that it brings them.
But still, China buys a lot of Russian gas, so it's part of the war. Don't you think so?
I mean, perhaps they are trading something for gas, but at the same time, I think that ultimately China would never do something that would jeopardize its own interest.
Okay, and one more thing, Sternmeier urged that China could influence its influence on Vladimir Putin to bring peace in Ukraine. Will China use this opportunity?
No, I mean, I think that ultimately China most likely will play a role in the peace process, but whenever that comes, I think China will play a role, but I don't think it's going to be in the near term.
But is it the interest of China to stop this war as much as quicker?
No, not really. I think it's in China's interest that the war goes on for as long as possible. And it's destroying the Russian military, which means that then there's no natural enemy that China really has to worry about. Well, except if you mean, I don't think Japan's any threat for China, though they think it is. I don't think it is. And I think that ultimately the Chinese are interested most in what makes money. They're not interested in anything geostrategic per se.
So how much more money China gets right now thanks to the war in Ukraine?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not quite sure, but I will say that it's quite obvious that China knows that if Russia destroys itself, it does a few things. One, it takes away the military threat. Secondly, it would devalue the cost of housing, apartments, real estate in most places of Russia. So it'd be cheaper for the Chinese to buy investments. Because one day Moscow will come back. I mean, Moscow's not forever going to be under sanctions. One day it'll be, I hope, a normal city of some sort. And the Chinese know it's a good investment because right now the prices are incredibly low. And so the Chinese, if you remember how they've operated in other countries, including the United States and New York, for instance, they bought just tons of assets. They bought a ton of different properties. Why? With the hope back in the 1980s when the economy was doing badly, with the hope that one day the economy will improve and it'll be a good investment.
Yeah, and let's talk about position of Europe a little bit. We could see that Macron urged a lot of time that Europe should think about security guarantees for Russia, but he didn't tell anything about Ukraine's guarantees. What role Macron plays right now? Don't you feel that France plays its own game to protect its interests, or it can work out for Putin to start negotiations?
I think that in international relations, every country always plays its own game. That's the nature of what countries do. I mean, it's normal that you represent your own interests before anyone else's. In the case of Macron, his comments didn't really bother me that much. I think it's really sort of a misinterpretation. And the reason I say that is because Russia needs a guarantee. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, he didn't say that Ukraine would never join NATO. He said a guarantee. It could be a piece of paper. It could be France saying we personally guarantee that NATO will never use Ukrainian territory to attack Russia. Okay, that's a guarantee. Does that hurt Ukraine? It doesn't hurt Ukraine. It's nothing. It's words. It's just words. So I didn't find it to be that alarming. I think that was something that the French population, perhaps, maybe that in France today is a very interesting topic. Maybe they do think that the Russians need to be guaranteed something, and maybe that's why he did it. But as a whole, I don't think in any way it put Ukraine in a worse situation.
And what about NATO? Would NATO expand further in conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
No, not in the near term. I mean, I don't think that Ukraine is going to be able to join NATO for a long time. But I think that it's realistic for Ukraine is to get direct agreements, bilateral agreements, or multilateral agreements with countries like Britain, the United States, Poland, for their future security. That we'd have the same sort of mechanism as NATO, where it guarantees that if something were to happen, Ukraine would be offended by one of these outside countries.
Yeah, but how we should estimate the talks by Macron that Europe shouldn't rely on the United States much? What did he want to say?
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, they should build their own militaries. They're subsidized heavily by the United States. And so if they want to pay for their own costs, it's fine. I don't think anyone's against that. And the fact is, Europe is not ready to prepare. It's not prepared, sorry, to defend itself. It's not paying as much to the military as it should in order to have a competent military in face of a major war. And so I think it's a very reasonable point from Macron that the Europeans must take their own security more seriously and not just depend that the Americans will come and save them.
Yeah, I got you. So, and the last but not the least, Jason, how do you feel about the military aid to Ukraine? I mean, defense systems, new defense systems. How rapidly could Ukraine get them? Because one Patriot system, it's far too enough to protect our country from such strikes.
It takes time. I mean, and it's hard to say. The reality is when they decided to give weapons to a different country, it is quite a long process because they have to analyze how many do we currently need in the United States, how much do we need to defend our allies, how many more need to be ordered, how long does it take to construct them. It's a very long algorithm of questions. So I think it might take a little while. I don't think it'll be like months and months, but I think it's very easily 2 months or something.
Okay, I believe that our victory not far from its way. So thank you, Jason, for this interview. We made a lot of questions for such not a long time, and it was a great, fruitful talk.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.